Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Adam Gillham, the cinematographer for the excellent limited series, A Gentleman in Moscow, which you can watch now on Paramount Plus with Showtime. And Adam, I love the show. You've worked with director Sam Miller before, I know, obviously, most famously on I May Destroy You. So for this series, just in general, what were your the initial conversations you had about this like, and like kind of like how you would approach this?
Yeah, so I did I did I May Destroy You with Sam, and then we did a couple of other shorter projects. So this one came up, and Ewan McGregor was already attached to it when it was brought to my attention. So I was very excited to be working with him. I think that I didn't know very much about it. I hadn't read the book. I still haven't, because I'm waiting for the time and the distance from making it before I read it. But the initial discussions really centered around how we would do the exteriors. I think the interior of the hotel was a given that it would be in a studio, so that was fairly controlled. But the big issue for us was how we would do the exteriors, the Russian exteriors, the idle hour, his where he'd grown up, and also the sections where he goes out onto the roof, the sections where he walks through Moscow at the beginning. These were the thorny things for us to discuss at the beginning. And initially, we were going to go abroad to do them, to somewhere in Eastern Europe potentially. So we figured we had that all sewn up, and that would be all straightforward. We'd go out with a small crew and find a city that most resembled Moscow. And then the closer we got to shooting, the more apparent it became that we weren't going to be going outside of England, and we weren't going to be going outside very far away from Manchester to shoot those exteriors. So so that was probably the biggest logistic question for us. And then it was very different from anything both of us had done before, I think, tonally very different. So we took a while to find the tone and the right approach to it. We still borrowed a lot from what we did on I May Destroy You, I'd say. It was largely a handheld shoot. We were very small and simple in the camera, in the way we had the camera set up. We had very little in the way of cranes or anything like that. So we shot it very simply, and that was always part of the plan, really, was to keep the handheld feel going in the project.
I really love that about that. I think that's like apparent right away, because obviously this is a period piece, but I think audiences may be conditioned to think period pieces or whatever look a specific way. And the way this is shot, I feel like, is so different. That it's like not like that, right? In a great way. Like it's like, oh, you're kind of defying the expectations of the material and the way it looks with the way it visually looks. So I guess like, yeah, like why did you think that was so like, I guess like obviously why was that such a great way to approach it for you guys, and like how like kind of go off maybe what people are expecting?
Yeah, we did. That was very deliberate, really, was to go against the grain of the period drama. I think there have been some brilliant precedents for that. I think Gosford Park, Robert Altman came and did an amazing period film that didn't feel, in the way he approached it, felt so different from what had gone before in terms of more heritage period styles. So we definitely wanted to bring something a little more a little more raw and a little bit more less unpredictable to the way we approached it. And it definitely suits Sam as well. He works very well off a spontaneous way. The camera needs to be very reactive, and often the blocking will suddenly check. We'll find opportunities on the day, so the camera needs to be able to respond to that. And so handheld is often the way we find the camera is most responsive. But it was definitely, we definitely wanted to avoid it feeling like your normal period drama, and to find a different approach.
Yeah, it works really well. I want to ask you, like, obviously, if Ewan McGregor here, like you said, like, it's so great to work with him, I'm sure, and Mary Elizabeth Winstead and all these great actors. How does the approach, like doing the handheld and kind of like smaller, like crews, like you said, like not big cranes stuff, how does that help in terms of the performances, and like how how does that work with the actors, and how much do they like that, I guess?
Yeah, I definitely felt it helped enormously. There were a couple of the actors on there actually had been with us on I May Destroy You. Fenty, who plays Mishka, was with us on I May Destroy You. So there were some friendly faces there. But Ewan, obviously, I'd originally seen him in Train Spotting all those years ago, which was for me a real sort of breakout way of shooting, and it felt to me such a new way of approaching filming that it was really exciting to get together with him. And he was, all of the cast were, but in particular he was very responsive to a camera that was able to move with him and to allow him freedom. And and we would always try and find a shot that would cover the scene with him in preferably in one take. So we didn't have to break it down, and we didn't have to keep resetting. And the reset times were fast. So because it was very exhausting for him being in every scene for that length of time. So keeping it fresh was obviously important. And I think you can see in the performance that, it kept so fresh. And part of that, I'm convinced, was the lightness of the approach on the camera that, we could, and with that, we usually shot without a rehearsal with him very often. So it would be very spontaneous in that way. And he was brilliant, always prepared for that, to go without a rehearsal and to allow the camera to move and he would always end up in the right place. There was a kind of synergy between him and the camera that was brilliant.
Yeah.
And you don't have that with many actors, actually. I mean, it's a real great skill and a joy to do.
He is really, yeah, no, he's incredible in the show. I think it's such like, it feels like an effortless performance, but obviously there's so much effort that goes into it. But he's so, like you're saying, like very natural and just feels very real and spontaneous. It's really incredible.
And all the cast brought that kind of energy level to it. Always felt so fresh every time, and we felt it was our responsibility, to keep that freshness and to respond with a kind of fresh camera where we could. So I'm really glad you thought that.
Yeah. Did you, the show obviously jumps around through time so much. I guess, did that impact at all your visuals, or did you try to like, are you just going to keep the same, like, did you try to keep the same like thoughts and like visuals, or are you kind of adapting to the era because we're moving around certain times?
Yeah, we within the hotel, I think we kept it pretty consistent camera wise. Obviously, when it jumped to his childhood, we switched it around quite a lot, and we went with a different set of lenses, and we went with a different look, and just a signal, because some of those flashbacks were they were a little they were quite abstract, weren't they? They didn't really resolve, and that was deliberate, but we needed to flag up because some of them were so brief that they needed to immediately be flagged up that this was a flashback and a different time and place. So but as with the era, first of all, I think we tried to shoot chronologically as much as possible, so we did, because again it would be so difficult for the actors to keep jumping about in time. We tried to keep it as chronological as possible. So but we gradually changed more in the set design and the lighting design. We changed the lighting as we went through the eras. But yeah, we tried to find, certainly with the jumping about in time to the flashbacks, we tried to find a different language for that.
The flashbacks are so cool too, and there are like like POV almost at certain times too in those, right? Like, and I love that because again, that was like, I'm like, what? Just totally defying expectations, I guess. Like, why did like you guys decide to do that? Because I think that's like really great. And like you said, there's not a lot of those, but they have to have such an impact, and even if they're unresolved, because you kind of like learn so much about the characters there too.
Yeah, I don't think that was how they were originally written necessarily. I think they were originally written more as exchanges between the young Count and his family and friends of that time. And I remember Sam saying, what if we just didn't have the Count in those? I think there was an issue with having a young Count and how he would look, and but also it felt from the story point of view much more compelling to have it from that strictly point of view, to shoot them strictly as a point of view, and so they felt like his memory as well. And I think that works, when he's winding the clock and it suddenly goes straight into the memory, and his his grandmother's looking at him straight into the camera. You suddenly know, it suddenly feels very personal and very subjective and very like a real memory. So yeah, that idea came from Sam, that we would just never see the Count and everything would be subjective.
It's really great. Necessity is the mother of invention, maybe, right there. If you can't have, like, make it work, and it works really great. It's so good.
Yeah, because necessity was the mother of invention throughout that shoot, really, because as we were talking about not going to anywhere that really, I mean, they do resemble Moscow, but that all of those things, they force you to come up with solutions that so often you wouldn't have come up with if you had everything at your disposal. And that was one of the exciting things with the project. I think that everyone was inventive and trying to find solutions.
You mentioned that, like, what was for you for the outside stuff beyond like the hotel? Like you said, like what was the trickiest one to do, or like fine, was it the roof, or is it like like we're talking about the flashbacks? What was it?
Yeah, the roof was interesting because I think it was a decision whether to build that in a studio or to build it outside. And and on I May Destroy You, we had a little roof terrace on that, and we built it in a studio. And then I'd got into such a tangle trying to light it for day that we cut it off the set and dragged it outside. And it solved a lot of those issues, because it was such a small studio we had that I couldn't make it look convincing. So that governed the fact that we decided to early on to build it outside that roof so that the daylight work would look convincing. I think what I felt it was so important that when he goes up there for the first time, that it felt convincingly like a huge draft of oxygen for him when he goes out, and it felt convincingly like it was a beautiful morning looking out on Moscow. So that was fairly tricky. The middle blocks, which was shot by a different DP, they probably had the trickier side of things because they had a lot of night to do on that roof. But it worked beautifully both ways, I think, the roof. And the journey across, when he first makes the journey from the trial and then he's taken to the hotel, when we first walked around the town where we were going to shoot that, I couldn't really envisage how we were going to make that town look like Moscow. I mean, it had the architecture, and some of those northern towns are beautifully well preserved, and they have a great heritage of architecture from that period. But making the imaginative leap to know whether visual effects are going to be able to take everything away that shouldn't be there, and there seemed to be so much that was going to mean we couldn't make it look like Moscow, that it was daunting to kind of approach it. But I think it was really convincing in the end, that journey, and felt. I think yeah, felt good to me. We were lucky with that town hall that looked like the Bolshoi Theatre. That was, I think, what it all hinged around, was finding that theatre that would be a kind of iconic Moscow building.
Yeah, as a viewer, I would say I fully suspended disbelief. Not that I'm surprised hearing you tell all these movie magic secrets or
I know,
TV magic, but I
I
was like,
know.
it's really impressive. It is. So. Do you like? I guess we talked just in terms of like obviously the interiors and stuff. Just like the sets are so incredible throughout, obviously. But for you as cinematographer, how did that like? How was that like? How did you approach that and make sure the lighting was right and all those different things, and like in the various sections of the hotel that we see?
Yeah, the main thing for me was that the main reception of the hotel was supposed to have a glass roof, which I think we actually only see once when we look up, and they had to put a glass roof. But obviously it had nothing over the top of it, but because it had this big glass roof, for me it was important that the time of day could change, and that we could make it feel like there was a very cold, overcast day. Sometimes that glass was covered in snow over the top, so that we could have as much variation. Because we were going to spend so much time in the hotel, it was important for me to find ways of varying the lighting as much as possible, so that we could do evening, or we could do summer's day, or a cold winter's day, and night, obviously. But that for me was the biggest challenge, was to get enough lighting to have enough variety that we could constantly keep the interiors surprising. And also knowing the way Sam works, that he would want to travel through that once we've got a set as big as that, he would want to travel through it and not break it up, that it had to be able to be lit from one end to the other continuously. And I think that was I mean, the riggers we had on that shoot were extraordinary, and they built a whole world up there that they could up around the top of the set, which was a beautiful thing. And you could walk all around the set, and all the lighting was up in there. It felt very old fashioned. I've seen old fashioned pictures of Hollywood sets in that period, with all that rigging. But that was the main thing for us, was to have a variety of lighting and a variety of lighting states that would allow us to make sure it was never boring and always changing.
And when you're doing that much lighting, right, for this, like you're saying, like all different seasons and times of day and everything, like, are you, how do you keep track of all, like for you, how do you keep track of like what you want it to look like and stuff, I guess, like it just
Well,
in general. Yeah.
yeah, I guess I had a very skillful guy with an iPad who had it all programmed in there,
Okay.
and he was able to, work very quickly and store all our settings. So we had settings all stored for evening and for early morning. But I think within that we also constantly tried to change it. I mean, even where you look towards the doors of the hotel, very often the Count would go and stand and look out of the doors, and we would try and change that so that as you looked at there wasn't a lot of space, to be honest, because it was such a huge set. We had the biggest studio in Manchester, I think, but even there it was crammed from one end to the other. So there was only a matter of feet from the end of the hotel to the end of the studio. So we weren't able to kind of put that much in there, but we always tried to keep that variety going, even so that as he looked out, it wouldn't constantly feel like the same exterior, so that would be believable to some extent. That one of the big challenges was making that what was beyond that revolving door believable, that there was a world beyond the hotel. There weren't that many windows, but that revolving door was probably one of the trickiest things, actually.
Yeah. It looks great. Again, another thing where I was like totally like I'm believing this is like out, and because it really pulls off the magic. I guess it's like this is a really, I found this show like really incredible to watch, and obviously I think the craftsmanship throughout is so great. When I guess like when you think back on this project, like what's something you took away from it, or that you were like super, I don't know, like enthused by or proud of, or like whatever.
I I think probably it probably definitely is variety, actually. I'd say variety, and thinking on your feet. And also the other thing I would say is I tried to light with hard light in a kind of older fashioned kind of way sometimes, and look back at older films and see the way that I think we've got so used to lighting with a lot of soft light, or I have anyway, because to allow the actors freedom and the way it works on digital, soft is very bit that I tried to look at older films and the way they used hard light on faces. And for me, that was a big learning curve and something I've been um, wanting to get better at, really. And it gave me the opportunity to light in that way that I haven't done before. And to light with such great faces as well, to be working with Mary and Ewan and all those faces that took hard lights very well. And yeah, I'd say that was a key thing for me, as well as yeah, it offered great opportunities for being playful. The running out of the hotel and the exteriors and the fantasy sequences. We were able to think on our feet and just enjoy the opportunities and the variety that it afforded us.
Yeah, it is really great. I feel there is like a throwback old school like film quality to the show. I mean, like I thought like Casablanca I kept thinking of, right, in certain like old movies. And I think like what you're saying, I think the lighting is great. And when you have like real like movie star faces like Ewan McGregor and Mary Elizabeth Winstead, I'm sure that helps too, because they look like they're just, man, they're really they have that
Yeah,
movie star look,
yeah.
like it really
There's,
works.
there's a thrilling moment right at the end. Am I allowed to do a spoiler? This will
You
go
could
out.
well, it could spoil it. Yeah, I'll put a warning or whatever, but yeah.
When he puts the hat on, the trilby.
Hmm.
Remember, it's at the end, just before, right at
Yeah,
the very end, and
yeah,
he
yeah.
puts that trilby on, and I remember thinking it felt like a moment from the 40s or the 50s, from some fantastic old movie, and it was a thrilling moment, really.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, felt
really.
like
Yeah.
felt like it spanned an era when we saw that shot.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's really great. Great show. Gentleman in Moscow, Adam Gillham, cinematographer. Thank you so much for doing this. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.